And now to the remembrances we've seen today throughout the country, honoring the lives lost 80 years ago today. It was December 7th, 1941, when Japanese bombers killed more than 2,400 Americans in a sneak attack on Pearl Harbor. An attack that brought the U.S. into World War II and changed the course of that fight. It's a day to which we have fewer and fewer living connections each year. One estimate is that there are only 75 survivors of that attack still alive today. So we want to take some time to reflect on that with Shane Stevenson, curator at the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park. We're so glad that you're with us, Shane, and I want to begin with a question that may seem to have an obvious answer, but one that certainly is worth going into a little more in depth. So why is it so important to hold these ceremonies looking back each year?
Yeah, this was a monumental day, a date which will live in infamy, as we all are pretty familiar with from President Roosevelt. But it's important to remember that it's not hyperbole or overstatement to say that America's role in the world changed after December 7th, 1941. We were a nation that was divided, isolationist, or should we involve ourselves in the war in Europe and the potential coming war with the Far East? And this really solidified us as a nation and brought us together to coalesce around achieving a certain goal. And that was to defeat the totalitarian regimes of Italy, Germany, and Japan. So it is important to remember those that did, the greatest generation that participated, and just the groundswell of support that American citizens had, the sacrifices that everyone made, and that's why it's important to commemorate that, even today, especially on the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor.
And I want to talk to you about that greatest generation, because you're someone who, through your work, speaks with a lot of veterans from World War II and beyond. And we know that the voices of our World War II veterans become fewer with each passing year. And with that in mind, what's the one message that you think they would want to send, not just on this day, but going forward and have us pass on as the years go by?
I think their message was that they were charged with a duty. They were called and they chose to serve, and they served admirably. And what we learned is that we can also be, after the devastation of the actual conflict and the war, is that America is a force for good. And we helped rebuild countries, and we helped refugees around the world who were left alone by all of the war and death and devastation and genocide. So we were two sides of the same coin. We had to fight, but then we also were able to rebuild. And I think that's the important message that I hear from some of the World War II veterans I talk to. And even today, they're very humble with their service.
And certainly understanding, as we've been talking about, the history and our history and understanding what happened, and days like this sort of put that history and the idea of freedom in such sharp perspective. And even then, I don't think most of us can imagine what it really means to defend our country, especially in the way they did. When it comes to showing gratitude in a way that's really meaningful, what are some ways that you might suggest any of us could do something like that?
Well, I think the best way, like say a loved one who's passed on, is you remember them, all right? And you continue to tell the stories that we know at our generation, 4 generations later, of the stories that American citizens went through, the servicemen and women that went through, the workers in the shipyards, and just the amount of industrial building that took place, how we all coalesced around this one goal. So learning the stories, reading up on certain conflicts within World War II and the history, and to reflect on what they sacrificed. And now that they're dying off at a terrible rate every day, that's important to continue to tell their stories.
We're glad to have been able to have this conversation tonight. Shane Stevenson is the director of Museum Collections at the Buffalo and Erie County Naval and Military Park. Thank you again for joining us tonight.
You're welcome, Kate. Thank you very much.
And just ahead on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt, what still haunts survivors of the attack? 5 survivors, all over the age of 99, have made the journey to Hawaii for what could be the last time. They spoke with NBC News' Carrie Sanders about time and age and wounds that haven't healed.
How do you feel as you stand here right now, knowing that the Arizona was there?
I could still see the ship sitting there at 45 degrees, covered in the smoke.
You see that as you stand here?
Oh, yeah.
How come I survived, and why did they die?
And you don't have an answer to that, do you?
No, I don't think anybody does.
More of that emotional conversation is ahead at 6:30 on NBC Nightly News.